Welcome everybody and happy Friday. Today is our week 2 of Friday Tech Tips for Knitters, and today I'm going to feature short rows. I've been having lots of requests to do some sort of tutorial on short row knitting, which is showing up more and more in knitting patterns nowadays. So I'll just give you an example of where short rows would be used. Okay, this is a top-down pullover called ranunculus. Very popular. I'm sure you've seen me mention it or show it in different videos. Short rows are extremely popular for top-down pullovers because that is the way you control the front neckline being a little bit lower than the back neckline. So if you didn't have short rows, your back and front neckline would be identical and there would be no scoop effect in the front. So the back is a little bit longer here and the front is a little bit shorter here. So that's one example of where to use short rows. Another example would be when you're doing a shawl collar. So we have a lovely cardigan. It would be strictly a V-neck here if it weren't for the use of short rows, which gently build up the slope so it's much wider at the back when it turns back and much shorter at the front where it buttons up. The third example I have to show you is also a very popular example, shawl knitting. This is called Raising the Bar. It's knit in Pepino, one of the hand-dyed merino bases by the Yarns of Richard DeVries. And as you can see here, there are little wedges worked into the pattern. So each time you're knitting across, you're doing what we call short row method. You're only going across so many stitches, and then you're going back again, and then you're coming across and stopping a little bit shorter than last time, turning and going back. So each time there's a different number of stitches and a different pattern to repeat, but it creates a really effective shape, and that creates a longer edge to the shawl on this side and keeps the other side a little bit shorter. So we've got one wedge there and another wedge here, all worked with short rows. There are different methods for short row shaping. I'm going to show you two different methods today, the very traditional wrap and turn method and my personal favorite, German short row technique. Both methods have their use in different patterns, and I can explain more about that. Another project that calls for short row shaping quite often is sock heels. So once you get comfortable doing short rows and you've perfected your method with a bit of practice and patience, I think you'll find that it's extremely easy to do and not something that you want to steer away from. It's just helpful to know a couple of different methods and when to use them. So my two examples here are showing the traditional short row method, which is wrap and turn, and the more modern method, which is the German short row. I'm not sure if you can tell the difference between the two. I'll just hold each up to the camera. Does anybody want to comment? Do they think this is the wrap and turn method or the German short row? That's the right side facing and the wrong side. And here is sample 2, right side facing and the wrong side facing. So if you cannot guess which is which, that's entirely okay, because there really isn't a lot of difference between the two methods in the finished outcome. More of the difference happens in the technique and how you perform each of the different short rows. So for those of you who guessed this one is the wrap and turn method, you would be correct. It's maybe not as smooth on the right side as the other method. And on the wrong side, you can see a couple of little spots that give it away. So the German short row seems to be a little bit smoother and maybe less bumpy on the wrong side. So let's get started. I've cast on some practice yarn in a nice bright color, nice thick chunky yarn so you can see it clearly. So the first method I'm going to show you is the wrap and turn method, which seems to have more steps involved, and it does take more time. And I am a continental knitter, so I hope it's just as easy for you to see what I'm doing if you're a North American or British style knitter. So I'm going to start my first wrap and turn 4 stitches from the end of my knit row. Now when you're following a pattern, you're always going to have a guideline. They'll tell you exactly how many stitches to knit or purl before you do a wrap and turn. So I'm 4 stitches from the end of my knit row. I'm going to bring the yarn to the front of the work. I'm going to slip a stitch purlways, and then I'm going to pass the yarn to the back of the work. So we're already at 3 steps if you're keeping count. I'm turning the work. I'm going to make sure that the yarn is in front of me, and I'm going to slip that stitch back unworked to the right hand needle. So what we've done, we've created a little lasso around the base of our turn stitch. This will prevent any holes from forming. So now we're going to purl back until I'm 4 stitches away from the end of the purl row, and then we'll try a wrap and turn on the knit side. So did you count how many steps were involved when I did that wrap and turn? Was it 4 or was it 5? Oops, 1 too many. Okay, so 4 stitches away. My yarn is already in front of me, so I'm just slipping the next stitch purlways, bringing the yarn to the back. I turn my work. I make sure now that the yarn is in front of me, and I slip the first stitch purlways. Remember, it's important to slip your stitch purlways because you're not twisting it. If you were to slip it knitways, you would be twisting the stitch sideways and it wouldn't be lined up with the others. So purl is always the method for slipping. Okay, so now I have to pass the yarn to knit position, and you can see I've formed that little lasso around the base of my stitch. Now I'm going to knit across till I'm 4 stitches away from my last wrap and turn. A wrap and turn is easy to spot because you'll see a slanted little bar at the base, and you'll see a big space between the lower level and the next level where you turned and worked back. But if you're working in a very fine yarn on smaller needles, it may not be as apparent. So it's quite easy to use your clip-on markers and just clip your wraps, and then you'll be able to see them. Okay, so again, I'm bringing my yarn to the front, slip a stitch purlways, yarn to the back. You can make a little rhyme up if you like. Turn the work, and slip a stitch, and then I'm ready to purl back to 4 stitches from my last wrap and turn. I can see the space, I can see the extra bar at the base of my wrap stitch, so I'm counting back 4 stitches. So my yarn is already in front, I'm slipping a stitch, passing the yarn to the back, I'm turning, make sure the yarn is in front of me, slip a stitch, and now I'm going to, that was the last wrap and turn, by the way, because we've run out of stitches and we've created a nice curved effect here. And so now I'm going to reconcile my wraps with the knit stitches as I come to them. So this is a little bit of extra work that is involved in the short rows. So I'm going to knit until I'm 1 stitch before the wrap and turn. Okay, so you can quite clearly see the extra bar, the space. We know that's the wrap and turn stitch. So I'm going to lift the wrap onto my right needle, and at the same time I'm going to knit through my stitch and come through the wrap and turn. So I've knit the 2 together, and then I'm going to slide it off the needle. It's important to reconcile your wraps with your regular stitches as you work across, because you're closing up any gaps and you're also hiding that noticeable wrapped bar. So I'm going to knit across 2 more until I catch up to my next wrap and turn. I can see the bar below the stitch. I can see the space after it. I know I'm in the right spot. So first I have to catch that little bar on my right needle. Now we're always going up into the bar, never down. So lift the bar onto your right needle, go into your stitch knitways, come through stitch and bar as if you've knit 2 together. Okay, I'll knit to the end of the row and then turn, and we'll do the same thing on the purl row. Now a lot of knitters say they have more trouble reconciling their wraps on the purl side. They find that they have a bar that's visible on the right side of the work, and that is the reason that sometimes the wrap and turn is not as popular as the other methods. So I'm purling across. Okay, I've come to my first purl wrap and turn. So what I have to do here, making sure the yarn is in front, I have to lift the wrap, that little bar, I have to lift it from the right side and bring it over top of my needle. So now I have my purl stitch with my wrap side by side on the needle, and I'm going to purl those 2 together as one. So that is the little step that a lot of people miss. They forget that they have to pick up the wrap bar on the right side of the work and lift it onto the needle. So we've got another one down here. Okay, there's my wrap and turn stitch. So instead of picking up the bar on the purl side, I have to turn the work so I can see my right side and lift the bar. I'm lifting the bar onto my left needle, just over top of my purl stitch. Don't worry about separating them. They're going to be purled together. And then I purl those 2 together, and look, totally invisible on the right side of your work. So now we'll purl to the end and see how everything looks. Well, I don't know if you can really see it clearly. Definitely no holes, no visible bars on the right side. It might be a little bit congested here And then if we flip it over to the purl side, you'll see the wraps show up a little bit. But not bad. We've gotten rid of the holes, that's for sure. So the only time that you will not worry about reconciling your wraps, which means picking them up and working them together with your knit or purl stitch as you come to them on the next row, is when you're working in garter stitch. And I think I showed you on the shawl, this is all basically garter stitch. So the wrap and turn method is ideal for garter stitch, which is knitting every row, because the little bars are hidden in between the ridges. They're completely invisible, so you never have to pick up the bars and work them together with your knit or purl stitch. You just let them sit like a little lasso at the base of your stitch. But when you are working in stocking stitch or any other sort of pattern that does not involve garter stitch, you have to remember to reconcile those wraps on the next purl row or the next knit row. Okay, let's get to the German short row. And then you really have the chance to decide for yourself which one you prefer and which method is less work and less frustration. So again, I have a new sample. I'm just going to knit across till I'm 4 stitches from the end of my row. Usually when you're working short rows, there are increments of between 3, 4, 5, or 6 stitches each row before you turn. Okay, so I'm 4 stitches from the end. But if you remember in the wrap and turn method I showed you originally, I was 4 stitches from the end, and then I worked my turn on the 4th stitch in. So if you're converting to the German short row technique and the pattern called for the wrap and turn technique, you have to remember that you're going to work 1 more stitch before you turn. So I'm knitting 1 more stitch, and that is going to be my turn stitch. I just don't have to do all the fussy wrap and turn procedure. Okay, so I'm turning my work, very easy. And then all I'm doing with the yarn in front in purl position is I'm slipping the first stitch, which is our turn stitch, onto the right needle, and then I'm going to make sure the yarn goes over the needle before I purl. So I slipped one and I brought the yarn over to the back and I pulled, just like you're about to strangle the stitch. I pulled until I can see the 2 bars are apparent instead of the 1 bar. So the yarn over and then back to the purl position, and I'm just going to purl across merrily along my way until I'm 4 stitches from the end of the row, in keeping with our last sample instructions. Okay, now I'm 4 from the end of the row, and if you remember, wrap and turn would be done on the 4th stitch in, but because I'm doing the German short row method, I'm going to purl the stitch, then turn, and then I'm going to slip the first stitch with the yarn in front of the needle. Usually when you're slipping a stitch knitways, the yarn is at the back, but for German short row, I want to make sure the yarn is in front because I want to create a yarn over the needle. So I'm slipping a stitch, and the yarn is over the needle with my slip stitch, and I'm just going to pull it a little tighter, strangling the stitch until I see the 2 bars from the row below. And then off I go. I knit along until I'm 4 stitches away from the previous wrap and turn. And just like in the first sample, if you find that your wrap and turn or your German short row stitches are not apparent, just put a little clip-on marker to highlight where they are. Here I can tell that's my last turn because the 2 stitches leave a little bump on top and they look very tight together, and then there's a gap. Okay, so I stopped 4 stitches in. I knit the extra stitch because that is my turn stitch. I'm turning my work. My yarn is in front. I'm slipping purl ways onto the right needle, and then I'm going to bring the yarn over the needle at the same time, pull on it till the 2 bars are showing up from the previous stitch below the row. Back in purl position. And off I go, 4 stitches away from my last wrap, which looks like a very messy little piece of work there, but don't worry, it's all going to appear very neat and tidy in just a matter of minutes. Okay, so I'm counting back 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches, and then I work the extra stitch for the German method so that I can turn, bring the yarn to the front. So slip the yarn in the front with the stitch at the same time. Tug on the yarn until you see your 2 bars are showing up. And then we're going to knit across. Now we're ready to reconcile our knit row. Okay, so now I can feel that bumpy stitch. I know that's my turn stitch, so I'm going to knit 1 stitch before it. And then I'm just going to be careful to push that knotted part over to the back so that I can knit the stitch and the yarn over together as one. It's really magic. Whoever came up with this method is brilliant. And of course they were German. Okay, same thing here. I can see the yarn over first and my turn stitch second. I'm going to knit those 2 together. I'm anchoring it a little bit with my left thumb. There we go. And I will knit to the end, and then we'll reconcile our purl turn stitches. Already I've passed 2 of my reconciled knit turn stitches and it's completely invisible. There's no bumps, no looser tension, no holes. It's just amazing. So I guess you can tell which is my favorite method. Has anyone tried the German short row method? Has it become your go-to method? Okay, so on the purl row, I'm working up to my turn stitch. All I can see is just a jumbled up mess and a little bump on top. I'm going to purl together that whole jumbled up mess as 1 stitch. So that is my stitch together with the yarn over, purled together. And then I'm going to purl another couple. And then I can see that's the odd stitch. So I'm going to purl it together as 1. Just don't let anything drop off the needle. It all has to be purled together. Okay, so now we can see that is a beautiful row of purl. No holes, no noticeable tension flaws, and turning it over, the knit side even looks nicer. Because we're creating a curve at the top of the work, my knitting won't won't lay perfectly flat at this point. So again, this is what we're trying to achieve. Some shaping or a curved section in the knitting. Short rows can be used for shoulder shapings. They can be used for neck shaping. They can be used for top of sleeve shaping. So this was the wrap and turn sample. No holes, but I'm just not really happy with the extra little tension flaws there. And on the purl side, I'm not really happy with the wraps, how they show up, even though they were reconciled. And this was my German short row sample, which I'm very happy with. And now you know why it's my favorite method. So I hope the Friday tech tips were helpful this week. And you can always leave some suggestions in the comments of what you would like to see me feature. If it's a very short technique, I might be able to fit it in with another technique so we could get 2 for 1. We still have a couple more weeks of tech tips on Fridays at 2. And for anyone who misses the live video today, it will be featured in our events page, so you can share it with friends, share it with knitters, and let them know what you've learned today. Hope everyone has a wonderful Victoria Day weekend, and hope to see you next Friday for tech tips.